Can the voice of the youth truly sway the course of political agendas? Welcome to a journey through time, where we will explore the rise of youth activism and its impact on politics. The youth, bursting with energy, fresh perspectives, and an unquenchable thirst for change, are not just the future, they are the present. Their voices, loud and clear, echo in the halls of power, challenging established norms and shaping political landscapes. Their influence is undeniable, their passion, infectious. From the streets to social media, their call for justice, equality, and a better world reverberates. Youth activism is not a mere trend, it's a force of nature, a tide that sways the political ship. The youth are not passive spectators, they are active participants in the political arena. So, buckle up as we embark on a fascinating exploration of this dynamic movement. Join us as we delve into the rise of youth activism, starting from the mid-20th century. Our journey begins in the tumultuous era of the 1960s, a time of significant social and political upheaval. The 60s were characterized by an undercurrent of change. A generation of young people, disillusioned with the status quo and eager for a brighter future, began to find their voice. One of the most prominent movements of this era was the civil rights movement. Young people, both black and white, banded together to challenge racial segregation and discrimination. They staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, participated in freedom rides to challenge segregation in interstate bus terminals, and marched on Washington to demand equal rights for all. Their actions, though met with fierce resistance, were not in vain. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed racial discrimination, marking a significant victory for the movement. But while the civil rights movement was making strides in the fight for equality, another struggle was brewing on the international stage. The Vietnam War, a conflict that raged from the mid-1950s to the mid-70s, was a deeply divisive issue. Many young people who were being drafted to fight in a war they didn't believe in began to protest. They held demonstrations, burned their draft cards, and even fled the country to avoid being sent to war. The anti-war movement became a powerful force, galvanizing a generation and forever changing the face of American politics. These two movements, the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War protests, marked the beginning of youth political activism. Young people, for the first time in history, were not just participating in politics, they were shaping it. They were pushing for change, demanding their rights, and refusing to be silenced. The 1960s set the stage for youth activism, but this was just the beginning. As we'll see in the next scenes, the seeds planted during this era would continue to grow, inspiring future generations to stand up, speak out, and make their voices heard. As we move into the 1970s and 1980s, the spirit of youth activism continued to evolve. The winds of change were blowing stronger, and the young were at the helm, steering the ship towards a future they envisioned. A powerful lens to view this period through is the anti-nuclear protests. Across the globe, the youth rallied, voicing their opposition to nuclear energy and weapons. They feared the annihilation of their future and refused to stand by passively. The protests were not just about opposition, but also about presenting alternatives. They advocated for renewable energy sources, echoing concerns about the environment that still resonate today. Yet the youth did not limit their activism to the streets. They also made their voices heard in the hallowed halls of educational institutions. The 1970s and 1980s saw the rise of student unions, organizations that would become powerhouses of political influence. These unions were not just about student governance, they were platforms for political expression, where the youth could debate, discuss, and dissent. They championed causes close to their hearts, from educational policies to broader social issues. They pushed for change, not just within the confines of their campuses, but beyond, influencing national and even international politics. Remember the Soweto uprising in South Africa in 1976? It was a student-led protest against the apartheid regime's education policies. This uprising became a significant turning point in the fight against apartheid, highlighting how the youth could shape political agendas. Or consider the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. Thousands of Chinese students rallied for democratic reforms, showing the world that the youth's desire for change transcended national boundaries. Their courage, their conviction, their hope for a better future were all powerful testaments to the impact of youth activism. The 1970s and 1980s saw the youth continue to shape political agendas, but the best was yet to come. The torch of activism was passed on to the next generation, a generation that would harness new tools and technologies to make their voices heard even louder. But that's a story for another time. The advent of the internet in the 1990s and 2000s brought a new wave of youth activism. This transformative era saw the rise of the World Wide Web, the birth of social media, and the proliferation of personal devices. All these elements combined to create an unprecedented platform for communication, networking, and information sharing. The internet became the new agora, a global marketplace of ideas where young activists could connect, collaborate, and rally for their causes. From New York to New Delhi, from Cairo to Canberra, young people found their voices and began to speak up, to challenge the status quo, and to strive for change. In this new digital landscape, activism took on new forms. It became faster, more dynamic, more immediate. Activists could now reach thousands, even millions of people with a single tweet, a blog post, or a viral video. They could organize protests, start petitions, and mobilize supporters in a matter of hours. This was the era of the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street, two significant movements that epitomized the power of digital activism. The Arab Spring, which began in 2010, was a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions that spread across the Middle East and North Africa. It was largely fueled by social media, with young activists using platforms like Facebook and Twitter to coordinate protests and share their stories with the world. Similarly, Occupy Wall Street, which started in 2011, used social media to spread its message and mobilize supporters. The movement, which protested against economic inequality, was marked by its use of the hashtag #OccupyWallStreet, a symbol of its digital roots. These movements and others like them showed how the internet could amplify the voice of the youth, making their calls for change louder and more impactful. However, the story doesn't end here. Today's youth are taking it a step further, leveraging new technologies and platforms to push their activism into the future. The digital age amplified the voice of the youth, but today's youth are taking it a step further. In the 2010s and beyond, youth activism has taken center stage. The world has witnessed an unprecedented rise of youth-led movements, each with a powerful message and an even more powerful impact. Let's take a look at the climate strikes, for instance. Spearheaded by the young and determined Greta Thunberg, these strikes were not just a call to action, but a demand for accountability. Greta, a Swedish teenager, started a global movement when she began protesting outside her country's parliament, demanding stronger action on climate change. Her tenacity and her resolve sparked a worldwide phenomenon, inspiring millions of young people across the globe to join her in raising their voices for climate justice. Then there's the Black Lives Matter movement. While not exclusively youth-led, it has seen significant participation and leadership from young activists. They've taken to the streets, demanding an end to systemic racism and police brutality. Their dedication to the cause has kept the conversation on racial justice alive and urgent, proving that the youth are not just the leaders of tomorrow, but of today as well. And who could forget Malala Yousafzai, a young Pakistani girl who stood up to the Taliban in her fight for girls' education. She took a bullet for her cause, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Her bravery earned her the Nobel Peace Prize, making her the youngest recipient in history. Each of these movements and activists represent the power and potential of the youth. They've shown us that age is no barrier to making a difference, to standing up for what's right. They've shown us that the youth is not just inheriting the world, they are shaping it. Today's youth are not waiting for the future to shape political agendas, they are doing it now. Youth activism has undeniably shaped political agendas throughout history. From the turbulent 60s, where the seeds of activism were sown, to the 70s and 80s, when the spirit of protest carried on, young people have consistently been at the forefront of political change. As we moved into the 90s and the new millennium, the digital age amplified the voices of the youth, allowing them to reach wider audiences and affect change on a global scale. And in the present day, we continue to witness the power of youth activism, as it shapes not just political agendas, but also societal norms and attitudes. Throughout these eras, one thing remains clear. The voice of the young is a potent force, capable of challenging the status quo and driving meaningful transformation. As we have seen, the voice of the youth can indeed sway the course of political agendas. The question is, how will you use your voice?